So we're here tonight. We're going to talk about how to talk about addiction with our kids. So we're going to explore ways to talk about substance use disorder with our kids. We're going to talk about language and thoughts and ideas around substance use disorder and what it may mean for us and for our children. We're going to hear what we need to hear. And I think, we can all understand that this topic is a very gray topic. And once we move away from our black and white thinking, we feel much better about our progress and our healing. So just a couple of group expectations here. If you can please put your first and last name in the chat. Listen to learn. I know this one is important for me because a lot of times I'm listening and then I hear something that excites me or that I want to respond to, and then I tend to stop listening. So that's really just for me. Keep an open mind. We're all at different stages in our journey, and we're all in different places in life. So as long as we're keeping an open mind, we'll be able to hear what we need to hear. So this one, what you hear here, who you see here, when you leave here, let it stay here. That's just a basic anonymity type of thing. So, when you're out and about talking about something that you learned in this presentation, please just remember to keep like specifics of a family and family names out of it. It's great to share what you've learned, but, just be respectful of people's privacy. And then if you need a break, take it. If you need to hop off screen, go, take a little walk around. It's completely understandable because self-care, as always, is the priority. Okay, so first we want to start with language. There have been many changes in our society over the last few decades. We now know that person-centered language can further a conversation and help with healing. In the past, we've used terms like drug addict, drunk, alcoholic, crackhead, junkie, etc., and none of those labels call to mind a human being who has a substance use disorder. We have used racial bias and cultural stigmas to separate the good from the bad. So there is a direct connection between how we talk about people who have a substance use disorder and foster care and adoption. Looking back, we can see that our society and our system has deemed persons of color with substance use disorder not fit to parent. And for most of our history, instead of providing help, we've removed children from their homes, communities, and culture. So when we're thinking about language tonight, I will be referring to alcoholism and drug addiction primarily as substance use disorder or SUD. And that's just a change that, or a person who has substance use disorder. And that's a change that I was made aware of quite a few years ago when I took a certification in peer counseling. So are there any questions or thoughts around that, or are we good to move on? And just holler at me, because like I said, I can't see you. Am I good? Okay. Okay. So throughout this evening, I kind of want you to think about what you learned about drugs and drinking as a young child. I want you to think about if what you learned kept you away from drugs and drinking, and if those techniques that worked on you or didn't work on you when you were a child, would those techniques work in today's climate? So just for fun and because I want to test my audio, I'm going to play a couple of these that might seem familiar to some of us who are of my age or or younger. So let me try this.
Say yes to your life. And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
Could you guys hear that one? It's quiet. Okay. Let me try this one and see if I can get it to be
Wait a second. What did you think about the
louder.
ride?
Whoa,
It was
I don't know what's
great.
happening there. Hang on.
Apparently, I've never been on
Oh,
live
sorry.
television before, but apparently sometimes I don't watch this. I don't watch the news.
I don't know why that's doing that. Sorry. Oh, can you guys hear that? Okay.
Here in
Oh,
RCA.
there we go. Ooh, sorry guys. Let me share again. Hang on. If I can. Why can I? Oh, there we are. Okay, sorry. I got it. We're good. Let me try this one. See if it's a little bit louder.
Drugs. Some of the big kids do them. So it's tough for us younger now.
But my mom and dad helped get this DARE anti-drug program in our school.
It's run by specially trained police.
Now we're saying no to drugs.
Just say no. Be your own best friend.
Get DARE in your kid's school too by visiting Country Style Donuts. Purchase the DARE Bear and show you care. Proceeds go to DARE in your community.
Okay. So I don't know why that one had to be all grainy like that, because it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. But and then here's the last one. I'll torture you with our history.
Okay, last time. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Oops. Okay. All right. So I don't know about you guys, but when I was doing this, those commercials brought back a lot of memories for me as a kid. But it also made me think about what is or was my relationship to alcohol and to drugs, prescription or street drugs. And also please keep in mind, how do you think about and speak about people you know who have substance use disorder? So these are just some questions I want us to keep in the forefront of our mind as we go through this tonight. So there's one other video that I want to play, and I think you might have seen it in other presentations. For me, it just really nicely illustrates the idea of addiction and how people are not intending to become addicted, and yet they do. So I'm going to try this and see if this one works.
You probably know VistaPrint
Holler
for
at
business
me.
cards. Yeah, we print
What's
that.
wrong here?
But did you know we also print that?
So let me find that one to pause it. So that one gets me every time. I think it's a great just a visual of how addiction can really bring people low. Okay, let me find how to get rid of that, and we'll go back to the presentation. Okay. Oops, I lost you again. Here you are. Okay. Okay, so, oops, our next one. Okay, substance use disorder. So substance use disorder is a very intimate and personal journey, especially for those experiencing from the outside in, family members, friends, and children. I consider myself one of those people who has experienced it from the outside in. And while the circumstances may be different, the feelings are the same. And when we talk about those feelings, and, you know, especially thinking of our kids, those feelings of love and anger and confusion, loyalty, disappointment, hopelessness, despair, numbness, and anything else, you know, that they might be feeling when you have somebody that you love and that you care about who has substance use disorder. We're more alike than we're different. And when we're thinking of bio families who may have substance use disorder, we can begin to change the narrative in our own minds from, I would never do that if I were pregnant or had kids, to, I wonder what I would have done if I had substance use disorder and found myself pregnant or had kids. And this is a quote that a friend of mine had given me a long time ago. Judgment is the heartbeat of stigma. Stigma kills relationships as well as people. So when does the conversation start? I think we've all heard that the earlier the better, using age-appropriate language, factual information, and destigmatizing conversations about drugs, alcohol, and other issues that your child will face. Answering all questions openly and honestly, and which can be very hard because we have this ingrained cultural stigma around legal versus illegal drugs. So I think it's very important that we first need to examine our own bias and around alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, prescription drugs, and street drugs. And it can be confusing to a child why mom and dad can have a drink after work when their biological parents were deemed unfit because of drinking. So we want to make sure that we're using person positive language and correcting the child or other people who might be using negative language. Staying neutral, and I think I'll probably say this a lot through this conversation, staying neutral when discussing substance use disorder and empathizing with the feelings that your child may have for their biological family, hurt, anger, confusion, love, loyalty, but not reinforcing those feelings with our own feelings. And this is a tough one because we may harbor some conflicting feelings or resentments towards the biological family for their substance use status or harm that came to our child when they were in their care. That's not going to help further a conversation with our child, and it will shut them down eventually. It might feel like a bonding moment, you know, when your kid comes to you and is like, "Ugh, I hate my biological family. They were terrible to me. They did this, that, and the other thing." And it might feel like a bonding moment to agree with them and say, "Yeah, I hate them too," or, you know, hate's a strong word, or whatever we would say. But there's going to come a point in time when their feelings are going to change, their views are going to change, they're going to have more understanding. And if they feel like we also hate their biological family, they're not going to want to come to us with their questions, with their concerns, with their thoughts about their biological family. So while we can validate our children and their feelings, because they have very valid feelings, we don't know, or maybe we do, what they went through with their biological family. It's not going to, it doesn't mean that their connection is severed or that they don't have complicated feelings. And we want to always be able to be there and be connected with them. So conversations with older children. So again, this should be an ongoing conversation with your child. This is never just a one and done. They're going to be getting older and having more experiences without you. And it's important to stay non-judgmental and open when listening, and also when relating facts and family expectations around substance use. And be very clear with yourself about your own issues and feelings around drug and alcohol use and why you think and feel that way. So I'm going to tell you just a little story here. So I was adopted from foster care when I was 4.5 months old into a family, had my mom and my dad and grandparents on both sides, that struggled with alcoholism. And the main alcoholic in the family at the time was my uncle, my mother's brother. And when my parents divorced, he actually moved in with us. So I got to live with a real live alcoholic. And I loved my uncle. He was funny and he was kind, but he was very, very sick. And so from my little kid perspective, he was sick. He couldn't hold a job. He smelled bad most of the time. He didn't know how to tie his shoes anymore. He couldn't walk downstairs. Like, he was very, very obviously sick. That's what I understood from my little kid perspective. What I didn't understand is why my mother and my grandmother were constantly yelling at him and crying and, telling him, well, if you would just stop drinking, then we would be okay. Or if you would just stop drinking, then everything could be better. You could see your children and you could have a job and have money. And this is all, you just need to stop. And you can stop. You just need to stop. And so they would put all these ultimatums and expectations on him. And from my perspective, again, as a little kid, I thought, they're crazy. He's sick and they're crazy and mean. So that's the way I saw it. So at some point, I think I must have been about 11, 10 or 11, he had a DWI. And of course, the judge said to him, you can do rehab or you can do jail. And so he chose rehab. It didn't work out. But when he was in rehab, we went to family day. And this is all this was, 30 plus years ago. And it's still like this today, which is odd. But okay, we went to family day. And it was just my grandmother, my mother, and I, and they put us in a room, and the counselor came in and he put on a movie. I have no idea what the movie was, but Michael Douglas was in it. And so my mother and grandmother were immediately loving this movie. They loved Michael Douglas, but he played the alcoholic father. And it kind of gave the archetype of what an alcoholic family looks like when you have the alcoholic father and, the mother who's, at the hands of the alcoholic father and suffering abuse. And then there were 4 kids. There was the clown, the kid that was always joking around and making sure everybody was laughing. There was the studious one, the one that was, getting straight A's and making sure that they were going to be the one to succeed in life. There was the promiscuous one, the one that wound up, having a child at a young age. And then there was the caretaker, the one that was kind of holding the whole family together. Anyway, the counselor came back in and he sat down with us and he explained Al-Anon to my grandmother and my mother. And then he said, there's an Alateen for you. And of course I perked right up. I thought, what the heck are you talking about? There's other kids that live with drunk uncles and we can talk about it. I thought that sounded awesome. I couldn't wait. I was so excited to know that there were other kids who were dealing with all of the weirdness that alcoholism brings into a family. And so my mother and grandmother took the pamphlets and they nodded nicely. And as soon as he shut the door, they turned to me and said, we will never speak about that again. You are not going to any groups whatsoever. So don't even think twice about it. And I was bummed because I thought, oh, I'm finally going to be able to connect with people around this thing that we're not allowed to talk about. I wasn't allowed to talk about the fact that, my drunk uncle was falling over in the chair and I was making sure that his cigarettes weren't burning the house down and things like that. So I was really bummed, on top of the fact that I was also adopted. Again, back then, it was a closed adoption. I had no knowledge whatsoever of any health history or any connection whatsoever with my biological family. So I was pretty isolated as far as, I didn't know any other adopted kids. I was very isolated as far as that was concerned. I also lived on top of a funeral home. My father was a funeral director, so that just made me weird. But the thought that I might be able to talk to other people about this, talk to other kids and just relate. And then that was taken away from me because my family was very clear about their own issues and feelings around drugs and alcohol. And their feelings were that we did not speak about it outside the family, period. This was something that we handled as a family. It was shameful and nothing that we wanted anybody else to know about. So that was my brief introduction to Alateen and how I did not get to go. I'll speak more about that later, particularly about 12-step programs. But so another way that we can open up conversations with our older children is explaining how companies are marketing to children and why. So understand that preteens and teens have an internal emotional life, which can be hard to find ways to cope with, and they may turn to substances or experiences like gambling, sex, bullying, as a way to try and cope. So having these, and we'll get more into like the actual how to talk about these things later, but remembering that that there is a way to talk about drugs, to talk about alcohol, to talk about vaping, because kids don't want to feel like they're getting taken for a ride. They don't want to feel stupid. They want to understand what's going on. And when you can explain, like, these companies, vape companies are not marketing to me, a 50-year-old woman, with bubblegum flavors and, cute boys on their zaps that they give you on YouTube or their zaps that they give you on TikTok. They're really marketing to you. So why? Because it's not legal for you to do these things, so opening their eyes to that can be a good conversation starter as well. So like I was just saying, ideas of how to start. So looking at this one, like, hey, I just saw a TikTok about a kid who had to have his appendix out after drinking an entire case of Red Bull. Like, I couldn't even believe it. What's in Red Bull that it would, hurt your appendix? Like, what did he do? Do people usually drink a whole case of Red Bull? Like, give it to the kid to be the expert around these things for a hot second, because you could approach it totally differently and be like, I saw this dumb kid who drank a case of Red Bull and had to get his appendix out. Can you imagine? And how awful? And instead of putting that judgment on, just using it as a conversation starter, giving them the seed, because they might be like, I don't know, sometimes kids don't want to engage with us around this initially, but that might send them off to be like, what's an appendix? And why did Red Bull make this kid get his appendix out? And what does that mean? They might be able to take that little seed that you just gave them, and they're either going to Google some answers, they're going to talk with their friends, they might bring it up in health class, you never know. Asking open-ended questions. So like, how does school handle kids who are vaping? I used to do this with my kids out of the blue, like in the car, everybody was like doing homework or reading or whatever on their phone in the car. And I'd come out of nowhere with like, hey, you know what? I was just thinking about it. Like, how does school handle kids who are vaping? Have any of your friends gotten caught, and like, what's happened to them? Just to, pull them out of whatever they're doing for a moment. They don't see it coming. Sometimes that gets them talking because they're excited to share those things with me. Whether or not they think it's right. Oh, school's so stupid, and they shouldn't have suspended, Jenny for having a vape. It's so dumb. Cool, let's talk about it. Talking about feelings. I'm curious about how you see technology as helpful. I'd leave it at that. How do you see it as helpful? Let them answer. If they don't have if they're giving you that, I don't know, I would fill in with like, I see it as really helpful. Here's how I'm using technology. I'm using it, in my work. I'm using it to keep in touch with people, not necessarily social media, but like technology. Start there. Asking them how they might see it as harmful. Have they been harmed, with social media, with technology? This one I think is important, especially with the older kids, allowing your child to be the expert and really listening to their thoughts and ideas without judgment. And it's really hard because, you just want to impart the wisdom that you have so that they don't have to make, mistakes, and they don't have to get hurt. And it's so hard to just listen without judgment sometimes. and then staying authentic in your own reactions, but also controlling your desire to fix, correct, or punish. There's time for that at another date, but if you can get a conversation started, especially if you have a kid that is not great at conversing, just listen. You can just listen, receive what they're saying, and then think about it. And maybe next week you come to the how can you correct what their thought process is, or how can you give them a new perspective on whatever it was that they said. So I don't think that any of this is easy at all, but I do think that there's some pretty good suggestions here. So I'm going to just pause again and holler at me if anybody has any questions or comments that you want to throw in. Okay, I'm going to keep going then. Okay, so connection and unconditional love. The next few slides are designed to spark thought and conversation. Please remember that addiction is an ever-evolving field of research and discovery. We started with some outdated ideas that have since been disproved. We're working with the latest findings, but we know that beyond all research, unconditional love and acceptance are the most important things for those experiencing substance use disorder and the family and friends who are experiencing it with the person who's struggling. Talking about all of the ways that substance use disorder is impacting your family and finding others who relate is key to healing. This is not a journey that one can take on their own, and a supportive community is necessary for healing. So like I said earlier, substance use disorder is a gray area, and we don't, as parents, have to say and do everything right, because we just won't. And it's okay to apologize. It's okay for us as parents to model like a redo. And it's okay to be frustrated and annoyed and angry, because substance use disorder is hard to talk about and it's hard to deal with. So it's a tough one, I feel. Okay, so we have some questions and responses. So if my child's biological family has substance use disorder, will my child as well? I know that weighs heavily on a lot of us. So there is a genetic component to substance use disorder, and it's not guaranteed that your child will also have substance use disorder. So research has proved that genetics can contribute about half to the likelihood of developing substance use disorder, while environment can contribute to the other half. So again, it's not a black and white answer. Trauma also plays a role in who starts using and who develops a substance use disorder. There's a difference. Just because you use substances doesn't mean you actually have substance use disorder. There is a higher incidence of substance use disorder in the adopted population, but that is still because of nature and nurture. It's both. It's not one or the other. And again, when we're thinking of our kids, and if they were to develop, say, diabetes, I mean, would you still love them, and would you feel like you needed to distance yourself, and would you blame them? So we want to share, we want to be very aware that, well, we'll get into the disease aspect of it later. So like I said, I was adopted. I had no information came with me at all, no health information, no way to connect or contact my biological family. So growing up, like I said, I grew up in an alcoholic home. That was my exposure to substance use disorder, was through my adoptive family. When I was 22, I registered for my non-identifying information through New York State, and I got that. And most of it was like, your birth mother had red hair and hazel eyes. Your birth father was, 6 feet tall with black hair and blue eyes. One was Irish, one was German. But the interesting part to me was it said your maternal grandmother had high blood pressure and your maternal grandfather was an alcoholic. Now, all of that information came through to New York State at the time of my adoption. So this was 1973. I thought it was interesting, first of all, that somebody could identify in 1973 my maternal grandfather being an alcoholic. I also thought, of course, my maternal grandmother had high blood pressure. She was living with an alcoholic. That makes sense. So I all of a sudden knew that I had a biological component to substance use, to alcoholism. So not only was I raised with it, but I also had it in my genetic line, which didn't mean much to me because at that point, while I had experimented as a child, as a teenager, I had made the decision it wasn't for me. Now, I'm not going to say that, my experimenting wasn't off the rails, because it probably was. I tried very hard to be an alcoholic. That's part of my story. It didn't stick. That's not what I am addicted to. It's not substances for me. Okay. If my child was born with substances in their system, are they addicted? So a child born with substances in their system does not mean that they're addicted to the drug. Some babies will show signs of withdrawal, which are similar to the signs of prematurity. I want to reference a study here that I found super interesting, particularly being a kid of the 80s. Back when I was a kid, the media was all about crack babies. So women that were using crack cocaine while they were pregnant were giving birth prematurely to babies that were titled crack babies. And the media led us to believe that these babies were going to live lives of absolute joylessness. They were going to have no emotional range. And they were probably going to be stunted in some ways, academically or emotionally. So interestingly to me, researchers followed, I believe, and I do have a resource for this, but I believe there was a cohort of 47 or maybe more babies who were born to mothers who had used crack cocaine, and followed them for 20 plus years and found that there were no long lasting effects. These babies that were born that were, set to be not productive members of society were actually as productive as their peers in every every countable way. And one of them was in a interview recently, one of the kids that had grown up, and she's got her master's and very successful woman. And she said the worst part of it was not anything that she had to do that might have been a result of her mother using crack cocaine, like, maybe she worked extra hard in school, she had trouble with reading or she had trouble with math, not those pieces. The really hard part was that people, the stigma around being a child who had been born to a mother who had been using crack cocaine. So her teachers automatically wrote her off as a child that was going to have problems with relationships with peers and problems with intelligence and problems with learning. And she didn't have those problems, but everybody thought she would. So she had to live under that stigma. And she said that was the worst part of it, not any health or any developmental stuff. And I thought that was super interesting because she knew what she had been labeled, and that label didn't fit and it wasn't fair. Okay, if my child was removed from their bio family after suspected or confirmed drug use by the adult members of the household, should they be kept safe or away from the bio family? Again, this is, these are kind of personal questions and personal answers. You know what's best for your child and your family. Here's the response. Given that your child is now in your safe and supportive home, they should be encouraged to stay in contact with the biological family. We know that biological family is important to our kids' development, identity, and overall mental health. By being a safe and supportive parent, you allow your child to explore their own feelings and thoughts about their biological family. By not being open to allowing contact and information, we can unintentionally shut down our child emotionally, which can come out sideways in anger, lying, and rage. So when we try to target our anger or our hate, it never stays targeted. It seeps into all aspects of our life. So when I got a little bit older, I knew I didn't want to marry an alcoholic because, my uncle couldn't keep a job and as all of his positive qualities and as much as I loved him, I didn't want to be married to somebody like that. So I didn't marry an alcoholic. I married, unfortunately, somebody whose drug of choice was crack cocaine. And it was different because, when we got together, we decided that we were not going to have alcohol in our home because he was also raised in an alcoholic home. Alcohol had never been a happy part of our lives. So we didn't want it in our home. And that was just something that we decided and something that we followed through with. And same with drugs. It just they were never a joyous thing to either one of us. So when we got together, we both said no drugs, no alcohol. I was fine with it. And I never looked back. He, because he had substance use disorder, relapsed again and again and again. And when we talk about what relapse looks like from the outside in, I almost wished at the time that I was using substances just so I would have some sort of way to numb myself to what was going on in my family. Trying to control somebody that is using drugs is fruitless, and just, it's probably one of the worst experiences of my life. So when we were divorcing, I thought, I don't want to love him. I still did, but I didn't want to love him anymore. I was sick of hating him because it took so much energy, and we had children together. So I really didn't want to do that. So I really focused on becoming numb so that when I had to deal with him, I could do it. I could deal with him as much as I needed to without any feeling whatsoever, to just be numb. And it worked. It took me a while, but it worked. And I got to a place of being numb anytime I had to deal with him. And unfortunately, that spread to every aspect of my life. And I started to realize that, my children were reaching milestones and I wasn't experiencing joy. I was experiencing numbness. It was like, great, that's wonderful. I'm glad they did that. But I had no internal feelings of, happiness for my children. And that was kind of scary. So I realized then, all right, I'm going to have to feel these feelings. I'm going to have to work through them. And at that point, I was an adult. But when we're thinking about our child and how these feelings can come out, like I said, sideways in those behaviors that we don't like, that anger, that rage, that lying, because if they're not allowed to process those feelings, especially process them with us, their parent, who loves them the most, this is what we get. And it's hard. And I know we get so annoyed with their behaviors, but we know that there's reasons for it. So that's why we're here, is to help. So we're talking about the biofamily's substance use disorder status, make my child feel like it's okay to use substances. As studies show, environment has as much of an impact as genetics. Your child is living and growing daily with you. By talking about your thoughts, your feelings, your history, and family values all the time, not in connection with the biofamily, your child will have clear ideas about what they think and feel about substances. So again, not in connection with the biofamily. So you're not saying, oh, well, they use drugs and drink and we don't do that in our house. Not that. Just an ongoing conversation of how you feel about alcohol, how you feel about prescription drugs. So by talking about it and explaining why you do or don't have alcohol or drugs in your home, you can connect your child with your values, and that gives your child confidence. It gives them confidence to make their own decisions about drugs and alcohol. It gives them something to fall back on, that structure, because they're going to find themselves in situations where drugs and alcohol will be present or plentiful, and they're going to have to make decisions. Talking about prescription drugs and why you take them and how to dispose of them properly, how long you take them for, why, or even how different generations of your own family dealt with substances. I know for me, I know with my adoptive family, my grandmother's brother was also an alcoholic. My paternal grandfather's uncle was also an alcoholic. I mean, there was alcohol generations back, and they would tell me about those people, and they would tell me stories around, the kind of trouble that they got into and how they got out of that trouble, which we'll talk about that in a minute, is how we teach resilience. Will talking about the biofamily substance use disorder status make my child feel like they're a bad person, or that my child's biofamily are bad people? So one of the best things that we can do is eliminate the stigma. Eliminating stigma will help your child adjust to the fact that the biofamily has a disease, and that played a part in their removal and their adoption. So being able to speak with understanding and kindness about the biofamily, regardless of the status of their substance use disorders, will help your child with their own feelings of confusion and love. Substance use disorder doesn't destroy love within a family. Substance use disorder isn't an automatic disqualifier for a child when it comes to wanting and needing a connection. Children are the most accepting and understanding humans until we indoctrinate them with our own belief system. So when I say disease here, I know that that can be kind of triggering for people when we're talking about substance use disorder, equating it with a disease. And even for people who have substance use disorders, sometimes they are also like, I don't have a disease. Here's why it makes sense to me. I heard somebody, like one of those woo-woo ladies, years and years ago now, explain that disease, when you break it down, is dis-ease, and it's a dis-ease within the body. So that's all that disease is dis-ease. And that made sense to me, because looking from the outside into, my husband, my family, my children, I felt that dis-ease. I could see that dis-ease, and I could see that they were trying to find something to come back to that homeostasis, come back to that balance within themselves. And that's where I could find some compassion and some understanding. So, it's not for everybody. It's a way that helps me understand what is happening with substance use disorder. I'm comfortable with it. Some people aren't, and I just wanted to speak to that. Is substance use disorder a moral failing? Like I said, it's a disease. It's powerful, cunning, and baffling, and it affects every walk of life, from the most well-respected families to the least. There are no barriers to having substance use disorder, old, young, and in between, which, I don't know if that's comforting or not. But when I like to think of it this way, so there's never been a child who has ever said, well, when I grow up, I want to be an addict. So I look at every child and every teen and every person and know that they have dreams and goals, and not one of those goals was ever to become addicted. Just wasn't. And I can put myself in their place, and I can imagine having an all-consuming need for something, whatever that is. And that thing now controls every aspect of your life, your relationships, your money, your time, and your health. And that seems intensely terrifying to me, and not something I would ever want to do. And the nature of addiction is that everything inside me would be telling me that I need that thing to survive, just to survive, like not even to have fun. I'm not talking about, having a couple drinks with friends and getting a little tipsy. It's not that. The complications that my body could experience, because I would truly need that thing after a certain point, and possibly even facing death if I didn't have that thing, that wouldn't be my thinking brain, right? That would be my survival brain that's kicked in, and it's not rational, and it's not controllable, and there's addiction. And it sounds to me, and I've heard lots and lots and lots and lots of people who are in active addiction, who are in recovery, who are in all stages, speak to that feeling of absolute powerlessness around this. And it sounds awful. Can SUD be prevented by abstinence or punishment? So tough love is an outdated and debunked way to treat those we love who are experiencing substance use disorder. There's no amount of grounding or taking away of electronics or perceived fun things that will cure a child or person who is struggling with substance use disorder. It's the only disease that people get yelled at for having. We don't yell at people who have diabetes. or we don't yell at people who have cancer and tell them to, just stop having cancer because it's wrecking our life. So, and somebody had said this to me a long time ago as well. And they said, when was the last time somebody yelled at you and like yelled at you and said, you're doing this wrong. It's terrible what you're doing. You're hurting everybody. And, you're a horrible person. And you went, oh yeah, you're right. I'm totally going to change right now. Like, sorry. And then you just changed and everything was good, because that has never happened in the history of human beings. They might change for a minute, but when we're talking about substance use disorder, it goes far deeper than that. And that making those changes are hard, and it's something that they might want to do, and then they can't. If you think back to the nuggets and that kiwi bird in the beginning of the video, that heartbreak of it. Okay, here's one that I almost wanted to take out, but I think it serves an important point. Is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder completely preventable? Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is not as easily preventable as some would think. Many people drink before they know they're pregnant. Many cannot stop drinking without treatment. Many are stigmatized for their drinking and therefore are not offered help to stop during pregnancy. And there's now studies that confirm that the father and his alcohol consumption can and does contribute to fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So again, this is about the stigma, right? Stigma destroys lives and families and futures. And also I want to look at the barriers that there are to treatment for people who are pregnant, such as detox, not having available beds, or refusing to treat pregnant people, rehabs not accepting because of no insurance or dual diagnosis or previous history or criminal history. So our society does not make it easy or even feasible for pregnant people to just simply stop drinking. And depending on the level of dependence that a person is experiencing, the level of dependence on alcohol, stopping without help can be deadly. We like to think that when a person finds out they're pregnant, they can simply stop having trauma, stop having abusive relationships, stop being in poverty, stop drinking, stop doing drugs magically. But the reality is, being pregnant doesn't ease hardships, it intensifies them. And add to that the stigma a pregnant person feels not being able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps while being in the most precarious and vulnerable time that a human being can experience. So that's kind of where this fetal alcohol spectrum disorder piece comes in. Again, it's about the stigma and about understanding, I think. Not that it does, which isn't to say that it doesn't exist, and it isn't to say that our kids are not affected, because we know that they are. They just are. If I catch my child with a vape, drug, alcohol, does that mean they have substance use disorder and need immediate intervention in the form of legal or medical? Experimentation does happen. Finding substances that your child may or may not be contemplating using doesn't mean that they will have a substance use disorder. You can use this opportunity to dig deeper into where your child is emotionally, socially, and physically, because the substance is not the issue. The issues they are trying to cope with are the issues. So this is, I think, important to understand that, people can stop using, but that's only 1% of the problem. That's only 1% of the disease. That's only 1% of the issues. They can stop using. 99% of the problems are still right there. And when they stop using, they're all going to come to the surface. So when we're talking about our children, children experiment. And I think, being able to not lose it, because it's a scary thing. Absolutely. It's a terror, especially nowadays, because the street drugs that are out there have so many different unintended ingredients and consequences. And it is very scary for us, for them as well, which is why we want to keep this conversation open. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that with that one. Why can't people with substance use disorder just stop when their circumstances change, better job, pregnancy, housing, etc.? Because it doesn't discriminate. So regardless of age or place in life, income, family dynamic, substance use disorder can affect anyone at any point in their life. And there, but for the grace of God, go I. This one I thought was an interesting one too, is portrayal in the media of people with substance use disorder realistic. So the media has started to portray people with substance use disorder more realistically and thoughtfully, but we have generations of inaccurate portrayals to overcome. Negative bias, microaggressions, pervasive narratives of criminality and mental defectiveness are still prevalent. So what this I was thinking of is we want to think about what the movies and TV shows and social media say about people who have substance use disorder. And then we want to think about how does that affect our kids, especially if our kids know that their biological families have substance use disorder, or if there is SUD in their adoptive family, because it's everywhere. So how are they going to try and integrate that societal stigma around substance use disorder with their own feelings of love and loyalty and guilt and fear? So I think, again, this can be a really good talking point with your kid about how you feel about people who have substance use disorder. And it's a great opportunity to say, I don't like the way that this particular movie was portraying somebody who has an issue with substances. What do you think? How do you feel? Just ways to talk about it. So using substances generally thought to be a way to cope with or celebrate life, and we attach judgment to substance use when we view a person as not being responsible. Many people use substances responsibly, meaning their use doesn't impact their life negatively or affect their family and friends. The most successful treatments we currently have for substance use disorder are medical and societal based. I want to mention harm reduction here. New York State has adopted harm reduction as the modality for treatment. And that is where we are being more realistic. We're not saying it's if you're not abstinent, you don't deserve to be in our community. We're understanding that people have different ways that they can come to a place where they are, I hate to say productive, but productive in our society and where we can accept them. So today, the medicines we have can help a person reduce their physical craving. Some can help with mental cravings. Some can reverse the effects of an overdose. And we have aversion medicines that make it physically impossible for a person to get high from a substance. Also, we know from almost 100 years of AA, which is 12-step programs, that connection is key to helping people with SUD reconnect with their community. 12-step programs, as well as other talk therapies and group settings, have proved to be extremely beneficial in helping people who struggle with substance use disorder find a place where they're accepted and understood. And I can say that, using those group therapies along with medication has been, the studies that are coming out are almost miraculous, where people are finding a peace, a calmness, sobriety, or at least, health. So it's very positive. We have data that shows programs from the late 20th century. I like that late 20th century. They're talking like the 1980s, like 90s. That made me feel a little bit something there. We're not effective in keeping children off drugs, like we looked at in the beginning. Just Say No, the tough love concept that promoted families kicking out their loved ones so that the person would experience a rock bottom and then repent and then rebound into, being the person that they used to be, or the person that they had a thought that they could be. Those didn't work. And actually, we probably lost a lot more people than we needed to because of those concepts. But that was the general consensus, that was what was going to help these people. That was what was going to get them back on the, the straight and narrow. So we want, when we're looking at harm reduction and keeping people in their communities and in their families, communities and families have better health outcomes when we can keep them there and treat them there, because it also shows the community, it also shows the family that, first of all, we're not giving up on this person, we're not kicking them to the curb, we are respecting them as a human being, and we value them, even if they are experiencing substance use disorder, even if they are sick. we still value them and they still have contributions to make. Education, utmost importance. If you have a loved one with substance use disorder, if your child has a family member or a possible genetic predisposition to substance use disorder, education is key. And know that connection and communication with your child can lessen the impacts of substance use disorder. I think that's very important. We know that substance use disorder has the biggest component is isolation and loneliness. So keeping that connection and keeping that communication when it's awkward, when it's hard, when you're angry, is incredibly beneficial to what your child, what the future holds for your child. While it may not be realistic to expect abstinence for our kids, it is very helpful to encourage your child to abstain from using substances for as long as possible, because studies show that the longer the brain has to develop without substances, the better probability of that person not becoming addicted. So it's not to say that they won't use, it's not even to say that they won't use in a problematic manner, but there's a better probability if you can push it off. And being very honest with your kids about that. You know, I know that you probably are going to experiment. You probably are going to try stuff. I'd rather you didn't, because it makes me scared and it makes me have feelings, whatever those are. But it also is good for your brain. So giving them that information that they have control over this, they have control over this aspect, that can be a positive. And always using positive person-centered language will lessen the stigma and encourage discussion. I've included a lot of sites and articles at the end of this, and we'll send out this slideshow so that you have it for reference. One thing that we can do to have a sense of power in a very powerless position is become educated and advocate. So approaching our family situation with a sense that we can make a difference, not just for our own child, but for children everywhere, that can be really powerful. And you can pass that down to your child too, because children are, you know, they're very powerless with all of this. So giving them a feeling that they can be powerful, that they have this education around this piece of life, because this is a piece of life, no matter where they go, who they're with. Substance use disorder is a part of our world. And so giving them an education around it so that they can approach it with understanding, that's very powerful. It also helps to smash the stigma. And that's another thing that's going to be very powerful for our children. What can we do? So I had to throw this one in just because it's Bully Awareness Month. So don't be your child's first bully. Remember that their bio family will always be important to them, regardless of the status of that family. They have a connection, and they may feel negative about themselves if you speak negatively about the issues the bio family may have with substance use disorder. Do help your child have compassion and empathy for their biological family. Condensation and pity won't work, but straightforward facts and unconditional love will. Don't lie or exaggerate to scare them straight. When dealing with something as unpredictable as substance use disorder, it's not helpful to try and scare someone into not having a disease. Do speak openly and honestly and often about the good and positive qualities of people you know who have substance use disorder, and speak about overcoming hard times, speak about successes, speak about relapse and recovery. Because again, that's resilience. That's how we teach our kids that not only are we resilient, our family is resilient, but they are too. Do learn a new language around substance use disorder and share that with your child to smash the stigma and promote kindness and love. And do reach out to organizations, churches, schools, and any other parents to start discussions that will support your community and your kids as they navigate a world where 1 out of 5 people will be affected by substance use disorder, which means 4 out of 5 will be impacted by the one person who struggles with substance use disorder. I think it's super important to understand that we know we're in the middle of a ongoing mental health crisis. Our kids have been impacted by the pandemic far more than we choose to acknowledge. And we know that substance use is exacerbated by feelings of isolation and loneliness. We have, studies that definitively show, like rat studies that definitively show that it isn't about the substance. It's about feelings of community, proximity to others, and inclusion. Our kids already have one strike against them from the get-go as far as trauma. They have that isolation of being adopted and all of the feelings that that brings with it. So by giving them connections like extracurricular activities or chances to develop hobbies, youth groups, and strong connections with other adults who take on a mentor role, we decrease the likelihood that they will feel disconnected or alone with their internal world, and we give them more opportunity to share with other people. And I think this is it, guys. This is the last one. Don't overreact. Many kids experiment with substances and alcohol with minor repercussions, and it doesn't lead to long-term use or abuse. And just because they are experimenting doesn't mean they're bad kids. It doesn't mean that they're going to have a lifetime of struggles. It means they experimented. It's hard to stay in the moment and not project, especially if we know that there is a genetic component. But really, all we have is this moment. Do react appropriately to a kid who experiments. React with facts about their biological family history, their adoptive family history, your expectations as a family around alcohol and drugs, and be consistent in your communication. So consistent across the board. So it's not, you know, one thing for them to do it, but not for us. Just stay consistent in your messaging. Don't threaten or give ultimatums. They just don't work. But do offer to find help in the form of therapy or rehab or other peer supports if your child needs it. So I just wanted to say one other thing. Please consider doing a Narcan training with your local OASIS, which is the Office of Addiction Services and Supports. It's free. Narcan is free. You can buy it over the counter now too, but if you contact New York State, they have people that will do, it's a very short, easy training. It's good to keep on you at all times. It's good to have in your house, and it's good for your kids to know where it is too. Encouraging testing strips. Again, that's a free thing that OASIS will send you, which they test for fentanyl. So even today, you know, there's fentanyl found in absolutely everything. It's found in stimulants like cocaine. It's found in recreational drugs like marijuana. It's not a bad thing to have test strips on hand. It's not a bad thing to talk to your child about that for themselves or for friends when they might be out and about. All of us when we're out and about in the community. Leave different crisis lines, hope line, put them in prominent places around your house, right where your kids can see them. And that's going to show that you're a safe place to have conversations, and for not just your kids, but for their friends to come if they need help or if they need to talk about things.